with us our legal counsel, Andy Celli. Folks are here to talk about the PAB appeal, and we ask that everyone stay on topic for any questions that you have today. Council Vice President Lightfoot has an opening statement, and then I think we would be able to turn to questions.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. The council wanted to provide an update on where we are with the Police Accountability Board lawsuit. In May, when Judge Ark's decision was announced, President Scott stated on behalf of the council that the court's decision negates the will of the citizens of Rochester, and the city council stands ready to appeal Judge Ark's ruling to the higher courts. We must operate within the context of our legal system, but the city council is ready to defend the will of the citizens, and this decision is not the final say. Today, we follow through on that commitment made by President Scott. We believe we have a strong case, and we are confident that the decision of the lower court will be overturned. We have our attorney, Andy Celli, here who can answer any questions about the appeal.
Greetings, everyone. Happy to field any questions on the lawsuit.
Well,
not everybody at one time.
This is Brian Sharp with the Democrat and Chronicle. Thanks for making time here today. I was wondering, Mr. Celli, if you could walk through a little bit of the sort of the what's ahead. What's the timetable? When do we hear? How quickly can we expect, I guess, to make arguments and possibly even get to a point of decision? And then I'm kicking this back to Willie. What effect will this have on getting a executive director hired and getting the PAB stood up?
So the next steps are the filing of more briefs, right? This is what we do as lawyers. There will be briefs filed by the Locust Club in 3 or 4 weeks' time. There'll be an additional brief filed by the City Council a couple of weeks after that. And then the next step after that will be an oral argument in front of the 4th Department Appellate Division, which will be a 5-judge panel. It'll be in Rochester. It'll be live streamed, as they always do, for those who want to follow that. The date on that has not been set, but I'm going to take a guess and say sometime in October. September, October would be a good guess. And at that argument, there'll be questions and back and forth between the lawyers and the judges, and then we'll all go back to our offices and wait for a ruling from the court. There's no deadline on when courts have to rule, and I've seen them go many months, but we're hopeful that we will get a ruling on this case, if not by the end of 2020, sometime in the first quarter of 2021.
Okay, and Brian, for your other part of your question, we've been making efforts to ensure that the Police Accountability Board has autonomy and that the members are leading this charge. The body will continue to function and move forward doing this appeal. The executive director position was posted, and the PAB members are reviewing the applicants as we speak.
Hi, this is Gino from City Newspaper. So in reading through the appeal, it seems there was a number of cases that prove precedent that this should be allowed that didn't really come up during the original suit. Do you know why those didn't come up and why they weren't considered when the original lawsuit was happening?
Well, they definitely came up. I mean, we cited 3 leading cases from the New York Court of Appeals that talk about the ability of localities to control police discipline, and the fact that that essentially divests the state law, the Taylor law, from the power to require collective bargaining with the police unions over these issues. What I would say is that the previous litigation, the litigation so far, was focused a lot on the referendum, as you remember, and so that sort of became the focus, and there wasn't a lot of focus on these 3 Court of Appeals cases. And then we have a decision on the merits that came down in May, which is what we're appealing now. And in that decision, the judge focused on something that Rochester did in 1985, when it essentially passed a law saying that it was going to comply with the Taylor law and collectively bargain with police unions, because it believed at the time that that's what state law required. In 2006, the Court of Appeals said, no, for places like Rochester, you don't have to do that. And so the judge really was focusing on the pre-2006 period and saying essentially that Rochester had agreed to bargain these issues. So that's really why it hasn't been front and center, but it is ultimately, in our view, those three cases and the issue about prohibiting localities from collectively bargaining police discipline, that's the beginning, middle, and end of the case. And we think it's very clear, and we are very confident that we're going to win this one.
Thank you.
If I could jump in again, going back to that 2006, the law that you state from 1985, that remains in place, right? And collective bargaining at this point remains under the, or part of the police or the locust club contract. There's been no action to change that to date, right?
That's correct. And essentially every locality like Rochester, which had been granted this authority by the state prior to 1967, was operating under a misimpression, which was that they had to collectively bargain with police unions over discipline. That misimpression has been picked away at since 2006 by the Court of Appeals, repeatedly coming up with these cases like this very case that we're working on now and saying, no, you don't have to collectively bargain. And in some of those cases, the Court of Appeals has even said, even if you've been doing it for many years, which in this case Rochester has, and even if there's a contract in place at this point, it doesn't matter. The pre-existing charter in the case of Rochester from 1907 governs this, and there's no requirement. In fact, it is prohibited to collectively bargain under the Taylor law if you have a pre-existing pre-1967 state law. So that's a very technical answer, but I hope that was helpful.
Yes, and I don't know, Willie or Mitch, is that part of the reason why we see no new contract for, if I'm not mistaken, police union contract expired June 2019?
Dr. Gruber, do you want to?
I mean, Brian, I wouldn't say that that is the sole answer, but I think that right now, you know, the bargaining has been a function of the administration and the locust club. It has been something that, you know, council has not been a direct part of, and it's something that, you know, as part of this process with the PAB, I think we want to see council continue to get some particular priorities in that new contract, many of which would align and mesh very matter-of-factly with what we're trying to accomplish here in the Police Accountability Board.
Brian, you can confirm this with maybe someone in the Human Resources Department, but I'm pretty sure it's not uncommon for some of our unions to be out of contract and continue to negotiate. Oftentimes you'll see in the budget that there are expired contracts and there's money set aside in our contingency fund to support the goal of coming to a final agreement on that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions related to the Police Accountability Board appeal? Give folks about 5 seconds before.
I want to make this point, and Dr. Gruber, if you want to expound on this as well, I just want to make sure that it's understood that we have never wavered from our commitment to defend this legislation and to support this Police Accountability Board. So I want the citizens to know that this council has been consistent, diligent, as well as our legal representation to make sure that we're going to take this all the way. We believe in this entire police accountability proposed legislation with all 5 teeth, and we continue to support that. And we're excited and happy to have great legal representation that we believe, again, that we're feeling very confident in this appeal. And we want the citizens to know that we are committed to their voice. 70% voted for this, and we're in total favor of going all the way and delivering on what the citizens have asked for in this city.
Yeah, and I would add to that is 75% of voters voted yes on this, and that was prior to what we saw happen in Minneapolis with the murder of George Floyd. That was prior to what we saw in Louisville with the murder of Breonna Taylor, and that was prior to the repeal of 50A. So I can only imagine what would happen if we went out to referendum on this again today. This is not only do we feel confident, but we feel that we are that the national moment right now proves that this city council and this community was ahead of its time, and that we're ready with the help of Andy and his whole team. We are ready to make that case in court.
Can I ask one more? The police, do you see the Police Accountability Board becoming operational before this court decision and thus without disciplinary authority, or do you want to hold until you get a decision?
No, the Police Accountability Board is moving forward. The part of the local law 2 remains valid, and the Police Accountability Board remains intact and will continually move forward. Once they hire their executive director, they're going to begin their training. They're going to continue to begin moving forward with all of, they have to develop a matrix. There's a lot of other pieces that have to be put in place, and they're going to continue to do their job and continue to move forward, regardless of the appeal.
Do you have an expectation when they will be operational?
No, this has never been done before, and we're in the middle of a pandemic. So things have been slowed down a little bit because of the pandemic, but they're still meeting, they're still reviewing the executive director piece. So I don't want to put a timeline on it because we don't know what this pandemic curve is going to throw us. All right, so go ahead, Dr. Gruber.
And Brian, it depends on what you mean by operational. I mean, right now the board is meeting regularly. The board is finalizing their bylaws. The board is doing a search for staff. If you're talking about when they're going to begin to investigate cases, I think a lot of that depends on when, in fact, they do hire an executive director, when, in fact, they do have a lot of their training done. And, I think there's a lot of hope that based on the timeline that Andy laid out and some other things, that all these things dovetail together. But I want to be clear, it is operating right now. It's just not, it's not investigating right now. There's a lot of work to do prior to it investigating.
Yeah, I guess I was referring to the latter of receiving complaints and investigating and making decisions, assessing policy, et cetera.
I think the biggest indicator for that is when there is an executive director hired. And BJ, I don't know if you want to give a very short review of kind of what that process has been.
The Police Accountability Board has been meeting about every other week, and they're focused on hiring an executive director. They have received applications, and the application period has expired. So they are in the process of developing how they would like to do their interview and the people that they'd like to bring in. I don't have a timeline associated with that, though.
Thanks, but that is moving forward, and I think that's a critical piece before we can answer the rest of your question, Brian. And again, to Vice President Lightfoot's point, this is not a function of City Council. This is a function of the Police Accountability Board, an independent body.
All right. Hearing no other questions, I'd like to thank everyone for their time today, and have a nice weekend.
You too. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.